We'll be focusing on what does a citizen-centric smart estate look like. I think all day we've been, rightly so, talking about the citizen and making sure that any transformation is user-centric. And in this panel, we'll look at actually what does that look like and mean in reality beyond the buzzwords that we all use. Before we begin, I'm just going to introduce our panelists who will tell us a bit more about themselves, their organisation and what they're doing in their day-to-day to get to that vision of a citizen-centric smart estate. So just to say, we have got with us Sam Hall, who is the Local Government Chief Digital Officer for Wales, Stephen McCarthy, Head of Design at gov.uk and the Government Digital Service, and Jenny Nelson, Digital Newcastle Programme Manager from Newcastle City Council. So if I can go to you first, Sam, tell us a bit more about who you are and what you're doing.
Hi, thanks for that. So I'm Sam Hall. I'm the Local Government Chief Digital Officer for Wales, which means I have the job of supporting all 22 of our local authorities on their digital data and tech journey as they improve their services for our 3.5 million citizens.
Oh, excellent. No small job there, Sam. And then over to you, Stephen.
Hi there, my name is Stephen McCarthy, so I'm Head of Design for gov.uk and the Government Digital Service. To give you a little bit of context, I've been at GDS for the best part of a decade and was on the team that launched gov.uk back in 2012, helping to implement their simple, accessible and trusted design language at scale. Then after that, for over 3 years, I led design across our Government as a Platform programme. This is where we built a set of common platforms that make services easier to create and cheaper to run. They include things like gov.uk notifications across government notifications platform, gov.uk pay across government payments platform, and the gov.uk design system. During this time, I also helped build and maintain what is now a thriving design community across GDS and the rest of government. This includes building a strong and inclusive user-centred design culture and improving things like our hiring processes and implementing effective career frameworks that helps us in government retain top talent within the public sector. To touch on kind of like when I think of a citizen-centric smart estate, for me, that's another way of expressing our user needs mantra, which is at the heart of gov.uk and GDS's work. And indeed, it's our government design principles begin with start with user needs, which is another way of phrasing this. And gov.uk has been and continues to be developed to meet user needs, working to the principle that users shouldn't have to understand the structure of government to access the services and information they need. And we rely heavily on user insights and have user researchers and performance analysts and designers embedded across gov.uk and GDS in order to better understand user needs on a daily basis. And lots of this stuff I'll touch on later, hopefully in this panel discussion.
Excellent, I'm sure we will. And then finally over to you, Jenny.
Hi, Georgina, thanks for having me with you today. I may well have presented to people before, but my name is Jenny Nelson and I lead the Digital Newcastle programme at Newcastle City Council. I also work very closely with colleagues at the North of Tyne Combined Authority, so covering Newcastle, North Tyneside and Northumberland as well. And I guess I spend most of my day-to-day work working with partners across the city, so in the academic, private sector, local tech firms, public sector, thinking about how we work collaboratively and use digital, make sure we've got the right connectivity, access to data, innovation and inclusion to tackle, I guess, those challenges which cut across organisational boundaries. So whether that's mobility and moving around, sustainability, or of course, more recently, COVID recovery. And I'm just going to shamelessly take the opportunity to share a new version of our digital rich picture. And just while that's being put up, I guess for me, in terms of a citizen-centric smart estate, I think we often have a tendency to view citizens in quite siloed ways, when actually that individual, and Stephen just said, it's not their responsibility to work out the mechanics of government or the local authority for that matter. And actually, in a lot of cases, people really don't want to know who's going to resolve that issue. They just want that issue to be resolved. So I think whether that sits with the council, health service, another government department, whoever, for me, being citizen-centred is often about actually looking up and looking across from our individual authorities and our individual areas. And I guess fundamentally, I'm a citizen of Newcastle. I'm not just a Newcastle City Council taxpayer. So that for me is quite key. I'm not sure if you can see the picture yet because it hasn't come up on our screens, but essentially what we're keen to do is drive value at the top, which is for the user experience and the way that we're using data and the way that we are taking all of that insight that we get from the bottom of the picture, which is the data collection, but actually doing something with it. So again, for me, it's not smart to just collect a lot of data and not do anything with it. It's then what you do with it that can actually, you know, inform decisions, improve outcomes for people, and improve user experiences. And I think, again, you know, we've had quite a bit of success in Newcastle about opening up some of that data for people to use for their own benefit and to change their own behaviours. And so I suppose, finally, for me, the smart estate, perhaps perversely, isn't necessarily about the institutions themselves knowing all of the answers. It's actually about, you know, how do we help our residents become smarter? How do we help them make better decisions and be more equipped to use the data that we have to change the way that they live their lives?
Excellent, thanks, Jenny. Yeah, and we could definitely see that great visualization, and great to have that shared out. Building the smarter state, because I think we launched it again, or you launched it at the 2019 one. So yeah, great to get an updated version on that. I guess, to the point of a citizen-centric services, it would be good to delve in a bit more detail what that looks like, and I guess how has digital transformed the way that we engage citizens, if we call it, in a smarter state. If I can come to you first, Stephen, to get that GDS perspective.
Yeah, sure. I think it's important, actually, I start with a little bit of more of an overview of gov.uk. So gov.uk, in many ways, digital home for the UK government and the canonical source of truth for lots of government services and information. In fact, it's home to, I think it's 23 ministerial departments and over 400 public bodies. And we moved nearly 2,000 government websites and turned them into a single publishing platform for government. And therefore, gov.uk now is made up of more than 500,000 pages, I think it is. And we support on average about 5 million visits per day from users who rely on its information and services, and about 17 million average weekly unique visitors at the moment. True volumes are higher because of owing to analytics consent tracking. But and now gov.uk's vision is to provide a trusted, joined up and personalised service for our users alongside enhanced data insights. So we set out a really ambitious set of priorities for the coming kind of year or two. And that's to always be available, accessible and accurate to people, to support the government priorities of the day. So examples of that would have been Brexit and COVID-19, and now how we recover from them, recover from the pandemic. Then the third one is around connected insights across gov.uk to enable joined up service delivery. The fourth one is provide a personalised and proactive service. And then the fifth one is to be channel agnostic. And to touch on some examples of how gov.uk has transformed the way government interacts with citizens, obviously we're dealing with really big numbers, as I touched on earlier. And when you have this level of engagement, trust is key in terms of how we engage with users. According to YouGov, we're one of the most famous digital services in the UK in terms of like recognition, up there alongside Amazon and YouTube. And we really need to be aware of not damaging that trust when we continue to iterate gov.uk. And I think this is a really core principle here, is that we need to design for everyone. We can't cherry pick our users. So accessibility is at the heart of everything that we design. And we know it's hard to be 100% accessible to everyone, but we can certainly try and lead the way in that respect. Another way how we're transforming kind of our users' daily interactions with government is that we've continued to try and simplify the jargon and design content to help people better understand what they need to do. So simplifying again that interaction with government. But what's really key as well, we also need to understand user context and design for that. Users access gov.uk in different situations and in different ways. And they might be in a situation where they have bad Wi-Fi connection or low data, and we need to design for those situations. And we need to make sure we have brilliant web performance and that people can access the info they need at the point of need, which is really important. And I touched on something there, which is the interesting word about how we work proactively to engage with users. So I touched on earlier regarding government as a platform, and one of the services that we delivered was gov.uk Notify, which is a notifications platform that can be used across the public sector. And we started GovUK Notify with the hypothesis that, you know, users need to check their status on a thing where they're interacting with government. And after, based on like research, and this is why research is very important, we quickly realized that relying on the user to do a thing in this respect is still the wrong way to approach a thing. So that's where we kind of merged this concept of proactive notifications and then reducing the burden on the user to need to know to go and do a thing. And this hypothesis has borne fruit of a really, really important product for central government. For example, GovUK Notify saw a 700% increase in volume over the pandemic period, sending a peak of about 11.7 million messages a day, sending 30 million messages over a weekend regarding telling people to download the NHS COVID app, and has so far sent 500 million notifications of COVID PCR test results, as well as supporting 280 COVID related services. This, alongside things like our GovUK design system, which is used by more than a dozen departments to rapidly create over 50 services during the pandemic, again avoiding massive costs for government to duplicate builds, but also enables services to quickly build accessible services out of the box. And these are just some of the ways where digital is starting to transform how we can interact with people in a better way at pace as well.
Great, thank you, Stephen. And also just wanted to say to our audience, if you do have any comments or questions, please do add them into the Q&A function so I can put them to our panel. Otherwise, I'll be using my chair's prerogative and asking lots of questions. But Jenny, if you could build on what you mentioned at the start in terms of your ambition, I guess, yeah, how are you embedding this in Newcastle?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I think, as I said at the start, our Newcastle approach has always very much been about people. So I'm not from a tech background, so this for me was never about, oh, let's have these really sexy tech projects. Don't get me wrong, are really nice sometimes, but actually it was never about that. It was about what can we do for people, what are the challenges that they are facing. And so I suppose when we have used technology, we've always been very clear to make sure that it's the right tech for the right solution. It's never been about over-speccing the technologies just to have a little bit of a showcase. But I suppose what's been obviously what I spend a lot of my time doing is the collaboration element, and I guess building on the idea that as a citizen, I'm not just a recipient of services from the local authority. So some of the challenges that people face in the city can't just be resolved by the authority, and obviously I think it's really frustrating as a service user, as a citizen, when you see the gaps, when you're really frustrated that actually, well, why can't they share that information with them? Why can't that information be pulled together? I've already provided that to somebody else, and so certainly while I certainly can't quote the numbers that the metrics that Stephen was able to, obviously councils are clearly very diverse organisations as well in terms of service lines and offerings. And so a lot of the work that I tend to do is at that enabling point. So aside from the services being designed and delivered on the top, actually what do we need to make sure that we have in place that allows us to work in those collaborative and open ways? And some of that goes back to the nuts and bolts of procurement, where we try and make sure that we're smart from the start in terms of access to data, making sure that if we need to access data from systems, we can, that isn't locked away, that isn't kept with suppliers where we have to pay for it. So we're really keen that we can do that, so that then gives us some flexibility to actually deliver collaborative user-centred services on the top of that. And I think that works outside of the council as well, in terms of trying to persuade partners to recognise, like I say, it's this kind of look up and look out, that persuade them that actually their customer, being citizen-centred, is about recognising that the data that they have might not just be of use to their current customers. So I think an example would be some work we've been trying to do to open up more mobility data in the city, recognising that yes, for some bus operators, people use their service and they use their app and they can see the real-time location information. And the bus open data service has meant that actually we can access that across operators. And then part of the work that I've been involved in has been, so how do we present that to people in the city in a way that doesn't require them to have development capacities, and that we can actually share data with people who perhaps didn't even realize that data was there, but that actually helps them when they need to find out their nearest bus or whatever. So I think, yeah, it's absolutely not just about delivering council services, and it's about making sure that those building blocks are in place, that you can actually take the steps that you want to at a later point.
Right, thank you. And Sam, if I can come to you, in the, I don't know, can we still call it the newish Welsh digital strategy? One of the missions is about designing services around the needs of the people who use them. How are you going about embedded user-centered design, I guess, across the service and the organisation? Yeah, to make sure, you know, I guess everyone is thinking like that by default.
So, I mean, it starts at the top. So it really does start with the chief executives across local authorities, and because if they can promote that human-centered design and they're putting people at the middle of everything we do, then it can make it much easier for the people that are working in the authorities to actually look at it that way too. So I think for a long time, and I'm sure Jenny will recognise this, but from a local background, you look at things, a lot of transactions. So councils look at transactions and they're measured by the transactions they take. And actually the transactions aren't value. They're just it's a number, it's X amount of calls, X amount of tax, council tax payments, X amount of this and X amount of that. But actually, if you turn that on its head and stop looking at those transactions and put the person in the middle, instead of saying a person has applied for a blue badge and you say a person is newly disabled, then it just gives you a completely different view of the service that you need to provide for that person. And so we're doing a lot of that, actually, just literally saying, well, that's great. Let's take some of those transactions and turn them on their head. And what does that then mean? And so having those conversations with senior leaders, talking about, you know, what it's like to be in the middle of some of those situations can just really hit home. It can really bring it back to people. And then we're taking the people in the authorities through that. So I think that there's been for a long time, those of us in this digital world are seen as kind of those people over there that do digital stuff. And so we're having lots of conversations around, yeah, that's all of you now. We're not just those weird people over there in strange t-shirts that climb under desks and wire things up. That's not what this is about. Every single thing we do touches digital. So, you know, whether it's the slab in the cab that tells the bin men where to go, or whether it's actually a really complex kind of front end system to try and find information out about, you know, safeguarding children potentially, there's a digital element to everything we do. And it's not okay now to say that you're not digital and you're not putting people at the middle of what you do, because you're at home and you're online banking and you're ordering a pizza and you're doing all those things digitally. You can't walk into work then, or into your lounge as I do, and say I'm not digital anymore. And I'm not going to deliver the same kind of lovely service experience that I expect for my citizens. So it's almost a story that tells itself, and sometimes all you have to do is stop for a minute and flip it on its head, and it has a huge impact. And the other thing to do is we're looking at some projects where, especially around data, we can take people right into the middle of that data and the importance of it. So one of our discovery projects at the moment is looking at food poverty, which is absolutely, you know, horrendous countrywide. There is no part of this country that is not struggling with food poverty at the moment. But actually, there's lots of data out there that can really, really help to understand how this is triggered and what tips people into that food poverty category. But we just don't necessarily access it in the right way or understand the data we need to look at. And it won't just be local authority data, although they will have loads of it. They'll have council tax records, they'll have benefit records, they'll have free school meal records. But if we work with our partners, so say health, third-party charities, we bring all that together. And instead of saying, let's have a look at the data and the problem, if we actually start wind people up by saying, do you want to stop children eating out of bins? Then you get an awful lot more buy-in from your local authority. And I think it is that narrative and that story is what's really going to turn us into that citizen-centred and human-centred, society that we really need to be for the future.
Oh, excellent. Thanks, Emma. And lots of actionable tips for those in the audience to take away and think about, who I'm sure, may be on a similar journey or wanting to engage their leaders or, elected officials if they're from, local government. But you're spot on. It does start from the top. But interesting as well that you mentioned, I guess, it being more outcome focused, not service led. It's, ultimately about the citizen, and something that we've seen a lot more of within the last year is that place-based working, which is nothing new, but the examples of the, the community hubs and local authorities being that signpost and working together with, community to faith groups is a good example of that. So just wanted to bring you in there, Jenny. I know you've always been good at, not saying smart cities, smart places, to recognise that. But I guess what's different now from, I guess, when you presented in 2019 to now, really?
Yeah, I mean, maybe that pandemic that would be.
Yeah, we forgot about that. Yeah, that's quite a big thing.
I think that, that without a doubt, that has accelerated everybody's thinking and action, and I guess consolidated what we knew, which was nobody can solve these really wicked problems on their own. We all have bits that we can bring to help, look at different alternative ways of doing things. We'd, I think, often caught ourselves, almost tied ourselves in knots around why we couldn't do things, and the challenges of accessing data, and the challenges of sharing data and resourcing in order to make things happen. And without a doubt, over the last 18, 20 months, however long it is, there has been more funding available to accelerate that kind of working. There has been more freedom or pragmatism possibly on behalf of partners in terms of ability to share, willingness to get round the table. So I'm not necessarily sure if things have changed, other than actually it's further consolidated the way that we were working, and clearly other places are doing exactly the same, because it's been on a needs must basis. We've had to work differently, and that, I think, that's been helpful. If there's positives to take, then that's certainly something that we should say.
Yeah, and I think on that, something that I want to touch on a bit later is, how do we not lose that momentum, and keep that going so we don't, revert back. If I can bring in you, Stephen, because we've had some good examples from local government, and GDS has been known for being able to show what good looks like. How have you seen that across central government, when it's bringing in leaders from the different departments, I guess, to getting their buy-in, whether using GDS products or services, or helping them on their transformation?
Yeah, and I completely agree with some of the stuff that Sam and Jenny have been saying there, especially about our hand being forced in a lot of this work regarding the pandemic, and forcing that join up across departments, which has often been, and indeed local government, which has often been quite difficult and mired in just complexities, which means that people kind of shied away from it a bit in the past. I think one of the examples actually, although it was by no means perfect, was the Vulnerable People Service. So this was the service to support clinically extremely vulnerable people, and it was launched from scratch, like in a very short amount of time. But GDS put in place, a front end data capturing tool, so essentially a front end interactive service, and put in place the data infrastructure to enable a coordinated response across multiple government departments, local authorities, and the private sector. And I think since March of 2020, when it was launched, there was 1.5 million users registered for priority access to supermarket delivery slots and local support services. And in wave one, I think about 4.5 million food boxes were delivered to over 500,000 clinically extremely vulnerable or shielded people, as the term probably we're more familiar with is. And over the longer term, I think the learnings from developing the vulnerable people service will help inform our transition towards more personalized services and how we work across different departmental and local government boundaries. And it will inform the creation of things like a central data exchange architecture to enable more effective sharing and analysis of data across departmental boundaries at both those local and national levels. And for me, that was a really interesting example of how we could potentially work together. Again, although there was loads of complexities there, but yeah, it was a really interesting thing where our hand was really forced to do some really interesting work in this space.
Excellent. I guess, you know, that touches on collaboration to solve common challenges, but we've probably heard a number of cases, whether it's local health or central, you know, each solving their own challenge. I guess in that smarter state, how do we stop solving the same problems in many different ways? If I can go to you, Sam, say, you know, is this easier because there is a chief digital officer for, you know, Wales for local government and for government? Does that make it any easier when it comes to collaboration using any of the levers that you have?
I think you know the answer to that, Georgina. No, of course. Of course, it doesn't. You know, it does.
A bit of hope.
It doesn't make it easier in that local authorities are they're sovereign bodies, they're governments in and of themselves, and so, you know, they have people to answer to, and they make their own decisions and they make their own choices. And so, you know, a big part of what I have to do is to move us from, you know, not just even from collaboration, but also into that state of mutual support, because we're all at different stages in that journey, you know, around Wales. Some people are further ahead than others in different services. Some people have, you know, better access to different technology and things. So we're all at different stages. So part of it is to kind of get us to a state where wherever you are in Wales, you can expect the same good quality level of service. And also, if you move between authorities, there's a seamless way of doing that. It shouldn't have to be hard for you to order a new bin in Powys and then order a new bin if you move to Cardiff. You shouldn't have to learn a new way of doing that. That should be simple. It's basic and it should be simple. And I guess another thing about solving the same problem, I think there's a couple of things in that for me, and that's you know, we're still on our digital journey. We're not near the end of it. We probably won't ever be. We're in this internet age now, and we're just now starting to see kind of the better utilization of smart technologies and the things that can tell us. So it's making sure that we're not wasting the information that we're getting now, and we're plowing it back in. It's so easy to get to have almost, you know, information overload and data overload, and then not know what to do with it. So I think being kind of you know, making sure that we use the good stuff and to plow that back into the decision making is really important. And then secondly, I'm not sure we need to stop, actually. I think that, you know, there's a reason there's that idiom of, you know, many hands make light work, and that's, I can see the argument for people wasting resource looking at the same problem, but actually what we really see quite often is people sparking off each other and, you know, getting further along in that problem solving because someone's come up with something different they hadn't thought of. And it'd be really nice if that still happened, but possibly in a bit of more of a coordinated way. So perhaps it's more about the coordination than, you know, if there's 22 authorities and they all have a really good idea about solving that, how do we boil it down and get the best bits of all of those thoughts together? So for me, it's that big collaboration and sharing piece and using the right data.
Yeah, so collaboration and coordination. Yeah, thank you for that, Sam. And that ties in quite nicely to a question we've got from the audience saying all councils have the same basic service. How can all councils benefit from other councils' great work? And I think, Sam, you touched on it in the coordination piece. Jenny, you know, are there real life examples of that from, I guess, what you're doing?
Yeah, absolutely.
Seeing?
Absolutely, and I think it's a very valid question, and certainly some of the things that Sam was saying there around why sometimes that might not happen. are very, very true. We know we're in a political environment, and sometimes authorities make decisions to do things differently, and you know, that's fine. I think in terms of the sharing side of it, I think we've taken a few steps towards that. For starters, we've actually started thinking about whether anybody else is, if we start looking at a process, actually let's make a much more concerted effort during discovery to see whether other people are doing this. Is there already code available? Are there already you know, user research reports, lessons learned? Are there show and tells that we can watch from, you know, way back where we can learn a bit more? And I think actually making sure that we don't just jump into something as if we're the first people who've ever thought of looking at it is definitely a real sort of step forward to us. And I think on the flip side of that, really sort of driving us to be much more open and transparent about what we are doing. I think other councils have got some excellent examples of how they do that around sharing their pipeline, sharing their roadmaps. I think that's really useful. That's something that I want us to get towards. But certainly, you know, actually starting to share code on GitHub and making it open and being much more open and accessible is the right way forward for us. And in all honesty, I would say that actually the work of people like the local digital collaboration unit have really driven a lot of that forward. And it's been quite useful for me to be able to say, well, this is the basis on which we get this funding. This is the way in which we will work. And actually that is helpful to be able to almost encourage colleagues to work in a different way. And having the digital collaboration unit keep almost like a little, I don't know, an angel on our shoulder or a devil on our shoulder, I'm not sure, to say, you know, make sure you're doing this, are you doing this, have you shared this, has been really helpful. And while I agree, I'm not sure we'll necessarily get to something where everybody is using the same approach. And nor might we want to, because there will be differences in user needs across different areas across the country. I think we are doing a lot more around sharing and accessing what other people have done, rather than just jumping straight into doing something ourselves.
Great, yeah, and those not familiar with the local digital collaboration unit, it used to sit, or it sits within the, or MHCLG, I don't know what the new acronym is for it. I don't know, but yeah, if you Google that, it'll come up. But yeah, they're very good at working in the open, and there's lots of examples and case studies there. Question for you, Stephen. Can you describe the tenancy and shared resources for departments within gov.uk?
Yeah, I can touch on something as well that really resonates with what Sam and particularly Jenny have just been discussing. So program work I touched on earlier that I led design across for a number of years was called Government as a Platform. And this is around creating a set of shared products that make services easier to create and cheaper to run across the public sector. So I already explained things like GovUK Notify, GovUK Pay, but one I kind of really want to hone in on, which touches on a lot of what Jenny was just saying, is the GovUK design system. And this is really an example of an internal central government service which, due to cross-government collaboration and buy-in, has really helped us and helped government to have a really, really important and brilliant service there that can be used across departments. So what I mean there is there's a real good community collaboration model to feed different design patterns into the design system, and there's that collective ownership across departments to ingest their insights and what findings they've had from engaging with their users, and really get this collective central resource that can be used across departments that's based on a shared learning. And what this really means, and what the great thing about this is, that means then there's no wasted effort in repeating the same things over and over again. And that happened an awful lot in government across many areas, where one department would do a thing, another department would essentially be solving the same problem at the same time. With this new method of community collaboration across this central bank of design patterns and resources and components and code, as Jenny touched on earlier, means there's no wasted effort, but it means departments then can focus on the bespoke things that are pertinent to their particular service. And when I say departments there, I mean service teams within local government departments, within central government departments. And but also this helps collectively form like best practice and sharing like from the ground up. And this, Sam touched on like the top-down approach to kind of really building the user-centered mantra within government. This, I think the design system is a really great example of that bottom-up initiative, like this grassroots initiative of service teams collectively getting this really great bank of knowledge and design patterns that can be shared across different organizations. And for me, that's a really good example of this kind of shared resource.
Great, thank you. So we've spoken a lot about, how do we bring leaders onto that digital journey and that outcome focus approach to services. We've got a really interesting question from the audience on, how can citizens be brought into the digital services development process itself? If I can come to you first, Sam, for your thoughts on that.
So, I mean, there's a really, smart line around, design, and that is, if you're not designing something with me, then you're not designing it for me. And that's where we come at it from. Is there is no point. You might think you know everything about the service because you've been working on it for X amount of years and you know the ins and outs of it, but actually people change and their requirements change. And one of the things we've seen, obviously, especially with COVID, is that accelerated drive to use digital services. And actually, people's requirements are outstripping what we can deliver, quite frankly, in lots of ways, because they are viewing us alongside their private sector organizations, and they're going, ordering a pizza is way easier than ordering a recycling bin. Why is that? Because isn't it the same thing? And actually, part of that is to learn from citizens and talk to them about, well, what things do they find easy? What things do they find seamless? What is it that they actually can identify as good pieces of service? Where do they think they get good service from? And try and build that into the design. We do a lot more user research now than I think we've ever done before. And one of the almost, there's no good things out of COVID, are there? But one of the things that's slightly more positive out of COVID is that being remote has really made it much more democratic in people's access to services and access to taking part in things as well. So we've had lots more uptake in people coming to talk to us, being part of show and tells, wanting to be part of working groups, because they can, if they can access digital, which is a whole other issue around inclusion, and is that when they can do that within digital, they are making more of an effort to get involved now because they can see the value of it. And then that frees us up to actually pick up the things that where people aren't able to access those digital services and spend more time looking at the whole service design. And so, there is we value that very strongly, and especially from the point of view of we have to do everything in 2 languages. So actually taking into account the fact that you can't just do something in English and then translate it into Welsh and expect that service to work for someone, then actually Welsh service design is a thing, and it's a thing in of itself. It's even more important that we get out and talk to people, and we have user researchers that speak Welsh can go out and actually talk to people in the language of their choice, and that's hugely important to include them in things. So we're getting there. I don't think we've cracked it, but I think we're doing an awful lot more than we were doing pre-COVID, because people want more and they expect more, and their expectations have been raised.
Yeah, definitely. Jenny, any examples from Newcastle?
Yeah, very much so. And actually, just to follow on the language point, it reminded me of our social care bot project from a few years ago, where we actually did build in, because of user research, some local dialect than the words that people use to describe things like the toilet, which is the netty in Newcastle, as it might be in other places. But actually, if we had never spoken to users, we would never have known that. We would never have assumed that people would want to use those words necessarily when having a chat about social care needs. So I think for me, I love engaging users. I think it's about being brave and supporting colleagues to be brave, because sometimes, well, let's be honest, users will tell you what they think and they will give you feedback, and sometimes that that isn't what you want to hear, and that isn't the service that you want to design. So I think there is an element of building up colleagues and how to do that in a really effective way. I think for me, I guess it's the mix of the formal and the informal approaches to involving citizens in digital service design. And I guess some of the informal ways are that I spend quite a bit of time lurking in the background of some of our Facebook pages and picking up on sentiment and what people are talking about and where are people raising issues. We do some more work with a local SME called WordNerds, who do AI-based analytics on some of our chat people in Newcastle, again, to try and pick up on, well, where are the areas of interest, where are the challenges, where's the pain points that we could perhaps think about. And then I think, you know, following up that more formally with, as Sam said, a real sort of focus on actual user research and actively involving people in those design processes. And as I say, it's something that while it can be a little bit scary, the positives have absolutely outweighed the negatives, even if it is sometimes a little bit of a shock to the system, possibly when you hear some of the feedback.
Thank you. And Steve, because I'm sure you've got lots to add on this, kind of your bread and butter.
Yeah, to touch on some, but yeah, obviously like that user research side of things and qualitative research has always been at the heart of everything we've done in GDS and gov.uk, as it should be that way. Your product should always be led by user needs. But we've tried to get smarter at really coordinating like all the different feedback mechanisms into gov.uk to get better connected insights. So to give you a kind of an interesting example in that way, so this year we built a data pipeline to combine the sources of user feedback that we get in gov.uk and have explored using things like natural language processing to understand what users are saying. And the insights from this data helps us to make improvements across the site. So, for example, user feedback showed that people were using the unofficial term tiers rather than local alert levels during the different phases of the pandemic. So we made that change to the term on gov.uk to make it easier for people searching for guidance. Another example of that is the terms like EU exit and Brexit and stuff, and what term people are using. We were able to then at scale kind of change the language and make it easier for people to find the things that they need. And this is just like, there's just some small examples, but we're looking to really, how can we get that really quantitative data and help that improve the website as well? Because, you know, the qualitative data is always going to be extremely important. We're always going to be doing ongoing user research with people, but to get that wide breadth, you need to combine the two, because obviously, as I touched on and we've all touched on, we really need, with government, we really need to design for everybody and meet the needs of as much use cases as possible.
Great, thank you. And just looking at time, I think, yeah, this will be my final question. So we've touched on a lot about, you know, leaders, colleagues within the organisation and citizens. So for my final question, I want to mention suppliers who, you know, equally are, you know, are partners of public sector in helping you drive citizen-centric services or outcomes. So I guess what would be your ask to them, or, you know, how can you better collaborate with suppliers to, I guess, deliver that vision that we've articulated for this panel? If I could start with you, Jenny, then Sam, and then Stephen.
Yes, absolutely. I think this has been an ask of mine for a little while, but it's the openness and it's the willingness that we need from suppliers to not expect that they will take our data and they will lock it away and then they will charge us to access it. We showed through the pandemic how important it was that we were able to access data in different systems quickly, accessibly, and, you know, able to do something with it. And certainly in terms of that openness and willingness of suppliers is really key for me. And I think something I'm also struck on when I talk to suppliers is goes back to the user research piece around, you know, how can they demonstrate how they have involved users in the development of their product, and, you know, what's the problem that they are trying to solve, where does this fit in? Again, I've had some quite shocking, I suppose, conversations where there hasn't been any evidence of user research, there hasn't been any engagement. It's very much been this is what we think you need, ta-da! And that just doesn't wash anymore. So please be more open, and please involve users in the development of your products.
Yeah. So I think I'd agree with everything Jenny's just said. Absolutely that. I'd also add a little bit to that around overselling as well. Is really that comes up a lot. Where we talk to authorities, and they we don't have a use for all of the things that we're sold as part of a package. What would be really really helpful and actually much more beneficial to actually the suppliers too is to understand really get to understand the problem, and I think that's half on us to really articulate what our needs and our requirements are, and actually you should push us really hard on that. And then the other one is to say, well, let's work to actually identify what that suite of things is that you need, because you're never going to use that thing over there because that's not what you've asked for. But we find that quite a lot, that we're just sold a package rather than the thing that we actually need. And there's also a big move now as well to much more open source and open standards. And if you're an organization that's really closed, then we're probably going to have to think twice, because the level of interoperability of things that we really need to have that, to create that seamless environment for citizens, means that you need to talk to other people. And so showing that is hugely important. And I think the other one that is again the crux of some of the stuff that we're doing now is that sustainability as well. It comes into everything we do. So we want to be looking at things which are sustainable. We want you to be able to show us how you've developed something, how sustainable it is, what what the carbon footprint is, all of those things that everyone is talking about all the time that sometimes get missed, are really now important to councils when they're trying to head for much more carbon neutrality.
If I'm to touch on suppliers from a slightly different angle, and more so how I've engaged them in GDS, it's a great way of bringing in highly skilled people into an organization at pace, and it's a good way of, I suppose, upskilling public servants on certain skill sets or certain ways of doing things, and bringing a product or service up the pace quickly. But you always need, for me, that team balance of suppliers and contractors and civil servants, and because you need to avoid that kind of the essence there where suppliers, they shouldn't be a black hole of knowledge, so that when they leave or when the contract ends, they take all that knowledge away. It needs to be that reciprocal relationship where it's a great way of upskilling public service and servants, so you don't have that over reliance on suppliers then, which can be a problem when you want to kind of iterate and move your way of working to a more steady civil servant team or whatever to operationalize a product or service. And that's just kind of coming at it from, I suppose, a slightly different angle to Sam and Jenny, but an interesting one at that.
Well, great. No, thank you for sharing those insights. I'm sure, of value to our suppliers and members on the coin. I think a key part of the smart estate is working more smartly, and I think that's from both sides. And what you touched on, Sam, about articulating the problem, and that's something that we do a lot at Tech UK, is to make sure how can we engage public sector before they're at that procurement stage, to enable to have these conversations. Are we solving the right problem, and having an outcome-based procurement. But lots there. I'm sure we could have gone on for another hour, but I'll let you get back to your days. But thank you, Stephen, Jenny and Sam, for a fantastic discussion. Really enjoyed that. Thank you.